Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to those who have joined, the students of the Haidh Masterclass. Today is part 9 of the Haidh Masterclass. It is the second last class and session of the Haidh Masterclass. Thursday will be the last class and it will end the entire Haidh Masterclass. We did schedule for 6 weeks. However, we are able to complete it in 5 weeks, alhamdulillah. Once we adjusted the time and added on another half an hour, it allowed us to finish at this time, thus giving you a week or so or more to prepare yourself for Ramadan. As a recap to last week's session, and before we do the recap, there's one or two points I'd like to bring to your attention. One is at the end of last week's class, one of the sisters posted a fatwa from Darul Karachi regarding intermittent bleeding. I informed you that the entire class, the entire lesson is based purely on the Hanafi madhab, Hanafi school of thought. The information that is presented to you, the book that is being used to present this information to you, the book is used to issue fatwa. So the fatwa that was posted from Darul Karachi, they actually quotes the book that we are using to present the information to you, stating that a woman has to wait till the end of the time, and if there's no blood, etc., depending whether it's before 3 or after 3, she'll make either wudu or ghusl respectively and continue with the salah, and she will continue like this for every salah period. So that fatwa was a very specific scenario and situation where a woman is having extreme difficulty, and this is happening with her all the time. So she approached them and they had given her some leeway in terms of the Hanbali madhab. Now remember, when you are shifting from madhabs Hanafi to Hanbali, you have to have very strong and exceptional circumstances. So that can only be done by Darul Ifta, by Mufti, specifically on your case, on your scenario. It's not a general rule. The general rule is what is presented to you here, and you will follow that on a day-to-day basis. 1. 2, in regards to the blood stopping during the day. For instance, a woman was in the state of impurity, was in the state of haze, nifas, etc., and then she's still in the state of haze and nifas during the day of Ramadan. Obviously, she didn't start the fast in a clean state, but once the blood stops, she has to break her fast. In other words, she must eat, etc., because she is obviously not fasting. Sorry, it's the if she starts her fast in a clean state, and then she starts spotting. Now, obviously, she cannot observe the fast because her fast has broken. I think let's leave this one for the end because it comes towards the end in regards to miscellaneous masail. Let's do a recap of the last session. So in the last session, we discussed 3 scenarios. The first scenario is if a woman has a habit of, let's say, 10 days, the maximum period, and the blood stops at 10 days, the maximum period, does she now count as a woman that is purified, or she still has to perform ghusl to be purified? So the ruling in that case is, once she reaches the 10-day period, the maximum period, she is automatically regarded to be pure. There is no requirement for her to perform ghusl to actually be pure. What this means is that all the laws of salah, all the laws of fast, etc., are applicable to her from that point onwards. Obviously, she'll have to make ghusl, etc., to perform the salah, but the laws applying to her in regards to salah and fast apply to her from that point onwards. Now, the other scenario is if this has happened in a salah time, and more specifically since Ramadan is around the corner. However, it will apply to any other salah as well. If let's say the Subh Sadiq Fajr time is 4:25, and she stops spotting at 10 days, 1 minute before the time of Subh Sadiq, 1 minute before the time of Fajr. In that instance, the rule is, if it's possible for her to pronounce and recite or say the word Allah, then the salah, the time, the salah of the time, which in this case is the Isha salah, the Witr salah, qaza of it must be made. It is wajib, it is compulsory to make qaza of it. Added to that, if it's, let's say, the blood stopped at 4 o'clock instead of 1 minute before 4:25, in that case, it would be possible for her to recite the word Allah and to also perform ghusl. When we talk about ghusl, we talk about the preliminaries of ghusl, finding a private place, etc., and the farais of ghusl only. If that is possible, which in this case it's possible, then she has to not just perform it, but she has to actually commence it in the time. So that's in the regards to the 10-day period, stopping at the 10-day period. So this is the first case. The second case is if the blood stops before 10 days, before the maximum period, but at the habit. So let's say her habit is 10 days. The blood stops at 10 days. All right. What is the rule there? The rule there is that she has not come out of the state of impurity until she performs a ghusl. Why? Because if the blood stops before 10 days, the ghusl is considered part of the haze period. In other words, that has to be done for her to exit the state of impurity. So she has to do that for all the laws of salah, fast, etc. to apply to her. Now, if this occurs at the end of a salah time, so any salah time, but more specifically, if it occurs in the month of Ramadan, before Subh Sadiq, before Fajr. So let's say the blood stopped at 1 minute before the time of Subh Sadiq, before the time of Fajr. In that case, now we have to see, can she pronounce the word of Allah once? Yes. However, it's not possible for her to actually perform ghusl. So because the ghusl is counted as part of the period, she will not have to make qaza of the salah of the time, which is Isha and Witr salahs, and neither will it be possible for her to keep the fast the next day. Why? Because the ghusl is counted as part of it. The ghusl is actually counted as part of it. However, if the blood stopped at 10 o'clock, then in that case, it's possible to recite the word Allah once, and it is also possible to perform the ghusl. In that case, we'll say she has exited the state of impurity before the Subh Sadiq Fajr time has entered, and therefore she has to make qaza of Isha, Witr, and she has to also keep the fast the next day. Right? The other aspect in regards to intimacy, conjugal relations. So if you look at the two scenarios, if the blood stops at 10 days, then we know it's permissible for her to engage in conjugal relations, although it's preferable to make ghusl and then engage in conjugal relations. When it stops at the habit, there again, she has to perform ghusl to actually engage in conjugal relations, or a salah becomes qaza. Basically, a salah becomes qaza, and thereafter she intends engaging in conjugal relations, permissible from that point onwards. The third case is in regards to the blood stopping before 10 days and before the habit. Right? Before 10 days and before the habit. So let's say her habit is 7 days, but then the blood stops on day 5. Right? So the same rule here is that she will not exit the state of impurity until she performs ghusl, right? So she has to perform ghusl to exit the state. Now, if this occurs at the end of a salah time, then the example here is of Fajr, right? Then same like the second case, it must be possible to recite the word Allah and to actually perform ghusl to actually exit the state, and for all the salahs and fasts, etc., to be applicable. The difference between this case and the second case, where the blood stops at the habit, is that if it stops at the habit, she makes ghusl, or a salah time becomes qaza, it's permissible for her to engage in conjugal relations. In this case, because the blood has stopped before the habit and there's a possibility of the blood returning at the habit, she will continue as normal, yes, once she makes ghusl, etc., in regards to salahs, in regards to fast, etc. But in regards to conjugal relations, she has to defer it. She cannot engage immediately. Why? Because there's a possibility of the blood returning at the habit. That's the main difference between the second case and the third case. Okay. Then we looked at the rule of where the blood stops before 3 days and then the blood stops after 3 days. So if a woman spots on day one and then she doesn't spot on day two, right? If she spots on day one, she must stop everything, but then she doesn't spot on day two, she must continue with everything. Question is, if the blood stops before 3 days and then she has to continue with salah, fast, etc., what must she do? The rule is it is wajib and compulsory for her to wait till the end of his salah time. If there's no blood there, perform wudu and continue with the salah. Similarly with fast, etc. However, if the blood now, let's say she spots 3 days full and then on day four, the blood stops, right? There again, it's wajib and compulsory for her to wait till the end of the salah time, right? If there's no blood there, she'll perform ghusl and then she'll continue with the salah, fast, etc. Right? So that's the rule in regards to that time. Now, if the blood now stops at the habit or after the habit, the question is in regards to waiting for salah. So here, because it's at the habit or even after the habit, there is no certainty of the blood returning because she's got a set habit. It's not wajib and compulsory for her to wait till the end of the salah time. Immediately she'll perform ghusl and continue with the salah. In the first two cases, where it is before 3 days, and after 3 days, it's compulsory for her to wait till the end of the salah time and either make wudu or ghusl respectively. In the last case, where it stops at the habit or after the habit, it's not compulsory and wajib for her to wait till the end of the salah time. Immediately she'll make ghusl and continue. However, it's still preferable for her to wait till the end of the salah time. Then we discussed the case of nifas, right? We discussed nifas. In regards to nifas, when it exceeds the maximum period, then she is automatically counted as pure. But if it doesn't exceed the maximum period, she has to actually wait. It's wajib and compulsory for her to wait till the end of the salah time, make ghusl and continue as normal. Then we discussed a woman that has continuous flow of blood. So let's say she has full continuous flow of blood, and it's continuing all the time. Now, how will we calculate her Haidh habit? We'll say that the first 10 days will be her habit. Obviously, if she's got a predetermined a previous habit, she'll follow that. But this is in a case, let's say the beginner woman, from day one onwards, she became a habitual woman. Thereafter, it's set. First 10 days will be a Haidh, right? In regards to the tuhar, how do you calculate the tuhar? So again, we know you'll go and follow your valid habit. That will be a tuhar. However, there's a limitation to it. The limitation is you'll follow the last tuhar, provided that it is not 6 months or more. It is not 6 months or more. In other words, it must be 6 months minus a moment. This is according to Maidani, and this is the view that Birgavi has followed. Right? And the reasoning given there is to create a differentiation between the tuhar of Haidh and between the tuhar of nifas. So we know usually the tuhar between two Haidh is short, but the tuhar between two nifas is long. So between two Haidh, you could have 15 days, 20 days, etc. Actually, the minimum is 15. Right? So it's short compared to the tuhar of nifas. Between two nifas, you must have a minimum tuhar of 6 months to actually count the next nifas. So you see, Haidh has a minimum of 15, Nifas has a minimum of 6. So to create a differentiation between the two and not an overlap, the tuhar must be less than the tuhar of Nifas. So 6 months minus a moment. This is Maidani's view and this is Birkavi's view. However, the fatwa is on Hakim's view, which is there must be a minimum of 2 months. There must be rather a maximum. It must not exceed this period of 2 months. So if it's fully continuous, let's say an abnormal situation, we'll say, listen, the first 10 days Haidh and the next 2 months will be the tuhar, and thereafter she can count another Haidh. So that is in an extreme circumstance and situation where there is abnormal bleeding. And then we looked at the different types of istihada, actually 8 types of istihada, all their types. And then we looked at some examples. And today we now come on to the different rules of Haidh and Nifas. So there are 8 rules that are common to Haidh and Nifas and 4 rules that are specific to Haidh only. In total, 12 rules. Now we're coming to the end of the sessions. This is the 12 rules. Then we look at the laws of Janaba, impurities. And then we'll look at the laws of Hadath Asghar, minor impurities. And then lastly, we look at the laws of Ma'zur. So these laws, we look at the first of them. There are 8 rules that are common to Haidh and Nifas. The first is, it's unlawful for a woman in Haidh and Nifas to perform any farz salah, to perform any wajib salah, to perform any sunnah salah, and to perform any nafil salah. Right, so you can't even start and commence these things. You cannot even perform them. So first, even if you started it, wajib, even if you started it, it doesn't count. There's no qaza for it. We'll discuss a little later in regards to sunnah and nafil salah. But for this slide, if you were in that state and you actually started it, doesn't even count. It's the same with nafil salah. In regards to the sajdas, so she can't do anything. She can't recite Quran, obviously, in that state. But let's say she recited it negligently or unknowingly, and then she found out she was in that state. The sajda tilawat will not be applicable to her. Similarly, sajda to shukr. Let's say she wants to thank Allah Ta'ala for something, and then she goes into that sajda to shukr. We know all the laws of wudu and salah facing the qibla apply to a sajda to shukr. So she can't actually do that in that state, and neither will a qaza apply even if she does it. Right? So the non-compulsion of performing any wajib act, including sajda tilawat, even if it is read or heard. So one is she reading it mistakenly, there too it won't apply. If she heard it from someone, her daughter, etc., reading it in a clean state, it won't apply because she is in an impure state. So she can't do all these things. In that state, she's excused from all these things. Right. So now, when she's in a state of Haidh, she's in a state of Nifas. What must she do when it is the time of Salah? So all the males are going to the masjid, all the females are reading their Salah at home, etc. What must she do? When the time of Salah enters, it is preferable, mustahab, to make wudu and sit in the area of the house designated for Salah for the duration it takes to perform Salah, whilst reciting tasbih and tahmid, so that the habit to perform Salah does not go away. This is a rule of istihbab, of preferability. She should go to her musalla, right? Obviously, she'll make wudu and then sit on the musalla and then engage in tasbih. Why? So that it doesn't make her lazy, number one. And number two, she's got daughters at home. She's got young children at home. They do not look at her being lazy in regards to the matter of salah. They see her punctual nonetheless in all circumstances. So this is something she should do. And if you look at it, it actually looks like someone trying to imitate someone else in performing salah, but you're not imitating them in the full performance of the salah. You're simply imitating them in the sense that you are making wudu and you're just sitting there. So this encourages others to be punctual on their salah as well. Now, the question is, when she spots, when does she stop salah? Does she stop as soon as she spots, or she waits for, let's say, 3 days to pass. So the rule is in regards to a beginner or habitual woman. A beginner seeing the blood for the first time, habitual woman has an established habit. They see the blood. What do? They will stop salah when they spot the blood for the first time. This is the correct view. So you're not going to wait for 3 days. So we know a minimum haze period is 3 days. But now she started spotting in that habit, around that habit. What does she do? Does she still wait for a full 3 days to pass? And then she says, you know what, I'm going to stop salah, or does she stop immediately as soon as she spots? The correct view is she stops immediately as soon as she spots, even though it hasn't reached that minimum threshold of 3 days. Now, the question arises in regards to early blood. So, a woman may have an established habit at the start of the month, from day 1 to day 5 to day 10, etc. But now it's coming on early. It's coming on 5 days early, 3 days early. What does she do at that point in time? She knows she's got a habit, and around that period, she sees the blood, and then she stops the salah. But now it's an early blood situation. So the rule is, if the blood may exceed the habit before the maximum period, she will stop salah. This is the most correct view. In other words, if you take that early blood, let's say 5 days or 3 days, and then you look at the place of habit and you say, listen, if I'm now spotting here and it continues right till that day, it won't exceed 10 days, right? Now, because it won't exceed 10 days and there's a possibility of the habit changing, the number changing, you will say, okay, now you will stop salah because there's a possibility of the habit changing. However, if the blood may exceed the habit and the maximum period, she will not stop salah due to the possibility of the habit not changing, right? But now let's say she gets blood 10 days early and she's got a 10 days habit in the place of the habit. I will say, listen, it's 10 days early, add the numbers up, 10 plus 10, 20 is definitely exceeding the 10-day period. It's not possible for this to actually be haze. So what does she do? She must carry on as normal because she has to follow what is certain. What is certain? The place of habit. Because the place of habit and the number is certain here, we know that even if it's a maximum and exceeds the maximum, the place of habit will take precedence. The number in the place of habit will take precedence and nothing will actually change. So due to that possibility, she must continue as normal and not actually take it as haze blood at this point in time. Now remember, these two rules that are being presented to you, that is for that point in time, number one. And number two, it's in regards to salah. It's in regards to salah. Does she perform? Doesn't she perform? It's not a rule in regards to finally determining a habit, because the habit can only be determined once that period has passed. Then retrospectively, she'll have to determine what were days of haze and what are not counted as days of haze, and then make qazas, etc., if applicable, of any salahs. This here is just for that one day or those days that you started spotting. What do you do on those days, right? Especially in terms of early bloods. What do you do? Stop salah, don't stop salah, etc. Let's look at some examples to fully understand this rule. So here's the example. A habitual woman spots 7 days and is clean for 20 days. The habit is 720. In the next month, she spots 7 days and is clean for 15 days. Then she spots early blood on day 16 of the Tuhar. Let's look at the calendar, the first calendar day, all right? So day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's where she spots, all right? And 20 days later, she spots again. This is a perfect example to show you that in calculating your haze habits, etc., nifas habits, etc., it's not about the calendar. It's about the numbers. Here's a perfect example. If you thought that she only spots at the beginning of the month, you wouldn't have counted any bloods before that, or you would count the bloods before that as irregular, etc. And you would have said that no, on the next month, that the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, that is where she actually spots. Whereas that is not the case. If we factor in the Tuhar, which is 20 days, then it's not just spotting at the start of the month, it's also spotting at the end of the month. So it's very important. Don't rely on a calendar. Rely on the numbers, because that will give you the true calculation of your haze, nifas, etc. So 7, 20, right? First month is normal, then 7 again, right? Looking at the second month, instead of spotting after 20 days, she now spots after 15 days on day 16. In other words, she has early bloods and early spotting. How many days earlier? 5 days earlier. So usually she spots uh, um, after 20 days, but now she is spotting after 15 days, 5 days earlier. So day 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 of the calendar, right? She's spotting earlier. So here we only know on day 20 that she has 1 day of early bloods. It's possible that she may or may not see on day 21, 22, 23, 24. But the question is, the blood that she's now spotting on day 20, what does she do on that day? Does she regard that blood as haze? Does she regard that blood as istihada? Right? So normally we'll say, listen, it's way before, etc. It's just 1 day, regard it as istihaza. But there's a rule here. The two rules that we looked at. What's the two rules? The first rule is, number one, you've got 5 days of blood early, right? And you've got the place of habit, which is 7 days, right? So you have to do an estimate. You have to do an estimate. And what's the estimate here? You have to estimate that, listen, if I actually have to spot continuously right into my place of habit, what will or wouldn't be counted as haze? So the estimate tells you it's 5 days early, take five, and thereafter your place of habit, and your habit is 7 days. 5 plus 7 is how much? Right? It goes over 10 days. It's leaving you with 12 days. Right? So now we know, because it's possible that it may exceed 10 days, because you're certain that this is where you usually spot in the month. This is your place of habit and this is your number. And if the blood now has to go into that, it's going to exceed 10 days. And there you're going to look at the makan, the place of habit. And there you're going to look at the nisab, the threshold. And you're going to find everything there. And everything is going to remain as 7 days habit. So now we say, listen, it's not a possibility at this point in time for this blood on day 20 to be counted as haze. Therefore, in regards to salah, what must she do? She must still continue with the salah. She must still continue with the salah. So let's look at the result here. If the early blood from day 16 of the tuhar is combined with the 7 days of habit after day 20 of the tuhar, right? So look, we're saying tuhar because it's early blood, right? So you take that 5 plus 7, and then it would exceed 10 days. As it is expected to spot 7 days in the place of habit, nothing would change. Therefore, she must continue with performing salah till day 20 of the tuhar. So basically, we're not going to count this at this point in time as high. She must continue as normal. Yes, retrospectively, let's throw in a curveball and say that, you know what, she only spotted thereafter on day 25 and day 26, day 27, 28, 29, 30, and then the first of the next calendar month, she didn't spot anything. Retrospectively, obviously, things are going to change. We are going to say that, listen, that day 20 till day 26 was actually 7 days of haze. Now, because she didn't, let's say she performed those salahs, we won't count those salahs. Let's say she fasted, we won't count those fasts, and it was in the month of Ramadan, she'll have to make qaza of the fast. So the whole point here is, on the day 20, what does she do? Thereafter, you still have to do a recalculation and retrospectively determine what were days of haze and what were not days of haze, and then make up accordingly. The only question is, what does she do on the day 20 of early bloods? The above is on condition that a complete tuhar of at least 15 days had passed before it. Otherwise, the blood will be combined with the previous blood and she will revert to a previous habit. Otherwise, if we've got a tuhar naqis situation, etc., then obviously the calculations will change. You could have, you'll have to combine the bloods with the previous bloods, and then follow a habit, and then work out place of habit, so on and so forth. So obviously you have to have a tuhar before that. And here we're talking about, remember, a tuhar tam, in complete purity, regardless of that purity being valid or invalid. You have to have that. That's the standard rule. Thereafter, everything can change in terms of your number, in terms of your place of habit, and even in terms of your tuhar going forward. So this is in regards to that day 20. What do you do on that day? So this is the example of where it exceeds 10 days by an estimate. The other example that we look at is where it doesn't exceed by an estimate. So here's the example. A habitual woman spots 7 days and is clean for 20 days. Right? So 720 again. In the next month, she spots 7 days and is clean for 17 days. Then she spots early blood on day 18 of the tuhar. Right? So first calendar month, she spots 7 days there. She's clean for the rest of the month, 20 days, and then she spots again for 7 days. Right? Everything is normal. But in the next month, instead of being clean for 20 days, she's now clean for 17 days. And then on day 18, in other words, 3 days before her habit, she starts spotting. Now, when you've got this type of scenario where a Tohre Tam has passed, and now you've got early bloods and early spotting, what do? Do the calculation, do the estimate. If this blood has to continue into your habit, right? 3 plus 7. So now we say, listen, it's not exceeding 10 days, and there's a possibility that the number has changed. And obviously, in that case, the place of habit has shifted. Due to that possibility and it not exceeding 10 days, what does she do? On that day, she must stop reading Salah. She must stop reading Salah, right? Because of it not exceeding 10 days, or the possibility of it not exceeding 10 days. She'll do everything. And obviously, you may have the number change. Based on our prediction or estimate, it could change to 10 days, or it could get lesser. So let's say she spots on day 22 of the calendar month, the second calendar month, 23, 24, and 25, 26. It stops there on day 26. So it could have changed later on retrospectively to that period, to 5 days, instead of estimating and determining it to be 10 days, right? So again, the whole question is, what do you do on the day 22? Stop Salah or don't stop Salah? In this case, she'll stop Salah because the possibility is that it's not going to exceed 10 days. Again, retrospectively, she'll have to calculate and determine what were her days of haze and what were not days of haze. The result is, if the early blood from day 18 of the tuhar is combined with the 7 days of habit after day 20 of the tuhar, 3 plus 7, it would not exceed 10 days. As it is expected to spot 7 days in the place of habit, the habit would change accordingly. Therefore, she must stop performing salah from day 18 of the tuhar. So the other thing you learn here is, when you've got early bloods, you follow what is certain. And what is certain? The place of habit and the number in the place of habit. So you take that early blood and add it to the place of habit and the number in the place of habit, and determine, one, does it exceed 10 days or not? If it doesn't exceed 10 days, stop reading salah, because there's a possibility that it would change. But if it exceeds 10 days, we say, listen, there's no possibility here. She must still continue with salah, because now it's exceeding 10 days. And when you exceed 10 days, you revert to the makan, the place of habit, and you revert to the nisab, the threshold in the place of habit. Okay. So moving on to some other points. If the blood ceases before a minimum period of haze 3 days, a beginner and habitual woman must make qaza of the salahs not performed. Now, she at that point in time may not know what will happen later on. She is just following a determination here. Retrospectively, if she she didn't perform salah, right? Then she has to obviously make those salahs. Here we're talking about the case where it stopped fully before 3 days, right? It stopped before 3 days and she didn't perform any salahs. Retrospectively, she found out, listen, these were not days of haze. What must she do? Obviously, she has to make qaza. Now, see, there's a question here. If she starts bleeding early, why is it assumed that her bleeding will continue into the place of habit? She bleeds for 10 days usually, so that's how she will bleed again. As long as 15 clean days are passed, will it not be haze? So remember, we're not confirming whether this blood is haze or not. Uh, it is a projection. The projection is you spotted now, and there's a possibility of the blood continuing. That's the projection. And based on that projection, if you take this number right till your place of habit or where you experience your habit and it exceeds the 10 days, then we say, listen, based on this projection, this blood will not be counted as haze and you must continue with salah. But if it is less than that, then we say, based on the projection, it is possible for the number to change and the place of habit to shift because it's not exceeding 10 days anymore. So it's a projection. So as long as you've got 15 days, remember, we're not talking about calculation of haze. We're talking about the projection and in terms of whether or not you should perform salah or continue with salah. Remember, your haze can never be confirmed until it is done retrospectively. So here, there's no discussion of what is actually haze and what isn't actually haze. The question is in regards to salah, and you'll never know what is haze and or not haze until you pass that period. So the only thing you have is a projection, and so the projection is what? What is certain? Your place of habit and the number in the place of habit. And based on that projection, you will determine what to do at that point in time. Retrospectively, you still have to confirm what's haze and what isn't haze. No woman can tell you that, listen, this blood is haze until we follow those rules, those numbers, and then retrospectively determine it. How do you determine place of habit if haze and tuhar is slightly different each month? Right. So look, your place of habit is determined after a valid tuhar. So as long as you got a valid tuhar, okay, so in this example that we gave, after day 20 is her place of habit, all right? And here she's got that 1 day of spotting on day 16. So we know there's a place of habit and the place of habit is after day 20. So here it clearly tells us there's early blood, right? So we know the place of habit is after day 20. So take that place of habit, which is 7 days, and add it to these bloods that you are now seeing, or this blood that you are now seeing on day 16. When you add it up, you'll know whether it exceeds 10 or not. If it doesn't exceed, then you know what? Stop your salah. If it exceeds, then don't stop your salah. Continue because there's a possibility that this is not haze based on that projection. Right? So look, your place of habit will continuously change if you've got valid tuhars. If you got invalid tuhars, your place of habit doesn't change. Right? Your place of habit remains the same. So if it's 20 this month, then we know, okay, after day 20, you spot. Next month, you could have invalid blood, but still your place of habit is after valid tuhar. That's why it's so important to record your valid tuhar habits to determine where's your place of habit actually. Okay. If the blood exceeds 10 days, a habitual woman must make qaza of the salahs of the days in which the blood exceeded a habit. A beginner woman will not make qaza of any of the salahs during the 10 days as a haze habit is predetermined as 10 days. So now, habitual woman, once she exceeds the 10-day period, we'll say, listen, for instance, her habit is 7 days. She didn't perform salah. She didn't keep fast on those days 8, 9, and 10 because she thought those are still days of haze, but then it exceeded the period. So retrospectively, she'll go back to 7. The days that she didn't fast, etc., she didn't perform salah, etc., she has to repeat that. So remember, keep this in mind that this is a projection to determine whether or not to stop or continue with salah. Retrospectively, you still have to calculate and determine after the period of 7, 10 days, etc., as to what were the days of Haidh and what were not the days of Haidh. So that means we look at the last month's tuhar each month to determine place of habit. Yes, you do that, but you look at the valid tuhar, not the invalid tuhar, because a a a a a valid tuhar shows you where the place of habit is actually. An invalid tuhar doesn't do that for you. So you still have to keep in mind what's my valid tuhar. That's why when you go to an alim and mufti, he's going to ask you not only what was your last haze habit. The proper way to do it is also to ask you what was your last tuhar habit, because you are not going to work with an invalid tuhar to determine place of habit. The valid tuhar is used to determine the place of habit. Okay, let's look at other rules. The unlawfulness of all farz or nafil fast. However, it is compulsory wajib to keep all the wajib fast. So a woman in Haidh and Nifas, she cannot keep any farz fast. She cannot keep any nafil fast. All right. However, it is compulsory to keep all wajib fast. We'll explain this as we look at these few points. So, number one, if a woman is keeping a farz or nafil fast and she spots during the day, even if it is a moment before sunset, the fast is invalid and it is compulsory wajib to keep the qaza of the fast. So, fast of Ramadan, she started, she's clean. She's fasting the Ayyam Bid, the white days fast, and before sunset, she starts spotting. We say, listen, immediately the fast is invalid and it is compulsory wajib on her to make qaza of the fast. If a woman commenced a nafil or sunnah salah and started spotting, it is compulsory wajib to make qaza of the salah, as a nafil sunnah becomes compulsory to complete it by simply commencing it. So now we know if she is in a state of Haidh nifas, she can't actually commence a nafil or sunnah salah. And even if she did so, it won't be applicable, won't count in any way. But here's a case where she is clean and pure. She started a nafil and sunnah salah, and then she started spotting in that salah. What does she do? She has to make qaza of it later on, because if you start in a sunnah, nafil salah, nafil act, then you are not allowed to forsake it, to abandon it. You have to make qaza of it. In the Quran Karim, the verse is there that do not destroy your actions. In other words, when you start something, do not destroy it, do not forsake it. So this is the case of sunnah and nafil salahs. In regards to a farz salah, let's say she started fajr salah, she started zohar salah, right? If a woman commenced a farz salah and started spotting, there is no qaza of the salah, as Allah has excused the farz salah for a woman in Haidh and Nifas due to the difficulty in making qaza of it. So now, blanket rule. A woman in the state of Haidh Nifas, she's excused from it. Even if the Haidh and Nifas starts in the middle of salah, right? Why is this farz salah different for sunnah from sunnah and nafil salahs, right? The qaza of the farz, so because there's a blanket rule for farz salahs, there's no blanket rule for sunnah and nafil salahs. She doesn't have to make the qaza for it. But fast, on the other hand, so the question arises: why is salah excused and why isn't fast excused? We say that, you know what, she doesn't have to perform and make qaza of the salahs in the state of haze, but she has to make qazas of the fast in the state of haze, if it's, for instance, the month of Ramadan. So one reasoning is given is that the qaza of the fast have not been excused and qaza of it is necessary, i.e., it is more difficult to make qaza of 10 days salah every month than to make 10 days qaza of fast once a year. Remember, Ramadan comes once a year, and the maximum that a woman usually would not fast is 10 days, depending, right? So it's easier to make qaza of 10 days fast once a year than to now make qaza of salahs every month for the rest of the year. So this is the rahmah and the mercy of the Sharia. Your salahs are excused, but not the fast, right? If a woman vows to perform a salah or keep a fast on any day, and then she experiences haze on the day she is performing the salah or keeping the fast, the qaza of it is compulsory, wajib, due to the vow being valid. However, if she vowed to perform the salah or keep the fast on the days of haze, no qaza is applicable as the vow is invalid. So remember, a vow to keep to perform a salah, to keep a fast, etc., those are wajib things. You make it compulsory upon yourself, right? So you made a vow to do it on any day, but then on that day you're experiencing a haze. We say, listen, you must make qaza for it because it doesn't count in the state, right? But if she vowed to say, you know what, I'll keep salah, let's say it's a very far-fetched scenario, I'll keep perform salah or keep a fast on the days I'm experiencing haze, then from the onset it doesn't apply because your wording wasn't right from the beginning. So the wording is important. So if the wording is right and then you experience haze on that day, you can't actually keep it. You have to keep it on another day. Other rules: the unlawfulness of reciting Quran, even if it is less than a long, short verse, and whether or not the purpose is to recite Quran, make zikr, or for praise. So now, in simple terms, a woman in the state of Haidh and Nifas, she cannot recite the Quran. Right? Now, she cannot recite the Quran regardless of it being a short verse, regardless of it being a long verse, and regardless of the intention, whether it is to actually recite the Quran, whether it is actually to make zikr or for praise. Now, remember, there's going to be an exception to this rule. So, if it is a short, this view that is being presented to you is the view that Birgavi has adopted, and we'll show you the view on which fatwa is given upon. So, if it is a short verse that is usually used in common language, like ثُمَّ نَذَرْ لَمْ يَلِدْ or لَمْ يُولَدْ, right? Or it is less than a verse, like Bismillah. Bismillah is also part of the verse of the Quran Kareem. It's less than a verse, recited when starting a permissible act from the right, you're making zikr, etc. Or you say Alhamdulillah for gratitude, then that is permissible. This is the view adopted by Birgavi, right? So he says he's of the view that you can't read anything, right, unless it is something used for in common language, like some verses he's mentioned, or unless it is a form of zikr, from starting from the right, etc., and some form of praise, etc. This is his view, right? Just keep that in mind. However, no other scholar has stated that it is only permitted to recite less than a verse if it is read as a dua or praise. So he basically allows you to only read it if it is less than a verse, and provided that it fulfills this condition, it's something used in common language, or it is for dua or praise. However, others, right? In fact, Abu Layth states, the author of Uyun al-Masail, he says that it is permissible to recite the entire Surah Fatiha as a dua, or any portion of a verse that has the meaning of dua without the intention of qiraat, right? This view is reported from Imam Abu Hanifa, which is preferred by Hulwani and others, right? So this is the view that we all follow, right? So in the state of Haidh and Nifas, it's permissible for her to recite a verse of the Quran. It doesn't have to be a short verse of the Quran. It can be an entire verse of the Quran. In fact, it can be an entire surah of the Quran. The condition is, it is read as a dua, number one, or it is the verse itself has a meaning of dua, right? So now the question arises in regards to manzil. A lot of women read manzil for protection from sihar, etc. So you will notice that some verses don't have the meaning of dua in it, but it is read as a dua. You see the two conditions here, what Hulwani says: it is read either as a dua, or it has the meaning of dua. So the whole manzil that you're reading it with the intention of dua. What's the dua? The dua is protection from sihar, from jinnat, etc. So that is why it is permissible to read manzil in the state of haze and nifas. Right. Other rules: a teacher in the state of haze or janabat, she may teach the Quran word by word separately. This is the correct view. Now, she is not doing it, obviously there's qiraat involved, right? but she is doing it to teach. Now, as long as it doesn't come into a form uh, of a verse, for example, she'll say "Qul," then she'll say "A'udhu bi Rabbi," etc. She'll teach it in that way to avoid it being counted as a word or a verse of the Quran Karim. All right, she'll do it separately, and that's how she'll teach. So, is it fine to recite Surah Ikhlas 10 times while in haze to attain a palace in Jannah? So, look, if you're reading it with that intention of dua, then that would be permitted, because you're not reading it with the intention of qira'at. You're reading it with the intention of dua. Other rule is it is makruh to recite the Torah, Zabur, and Injil, as all of it are the words of Allah, except that which has been changed. This is the correct view. So, when it comes to this, obviously, I know some people, they have the certain of these books in their houses. Maybe they're into comparative religion, etc. It's makruh to recite it. Why? Because there's a possibility that some of the words are words of Allah and some have been changed. So that's why it's makruh. Washing the mouth or hands does not permit the recital or touching of the Quran, right? So in the past, maybe they had this view, or maybe some people have this view that as long as you wash your hands and mouth, you can carry on. That's not correct. You can't do that. Some conclusions: it is permissible to recite the Quran letter by letter or word by word, right? Not the full. So it doesn't count as qiraat. It is permissible to recite the qunut and all forms of zikr and du'as, although it is preferable, mustahab, to do so after making wudu. So it's simply a preferability, but you can read all forms of du'as, etc. This would include your durood, so on and so forth. It's not disliked to do so, it's simply a matter of preferability. And in regards to looking in the Quran, permissible for her to look in the Quran. So let's say she wants to preserve, her memory in terms of the memorizing of Quran. She can get her daughter or son, etc., to open the Quran in front of her, and they could, help her turn the pages. Now the question arises in regards to your tablets. What about your tablets that you read Quran from? Right. So remember, one is a mushaf. That is the actual Quran, it is purely Quran, and one is your tablet, so on and so forth. The different rules regarding to mushaf, and there's different rule regarding to tablets, etc. You can touch the tablet, right, even if the Quran is open on it, but you can't turn the pages because now you're actually touching it. We'll discuss this a little later, right? So the unlawfulness of touching something with any of one's organs on which a complete verse of the Quran is written, even if it is written on a dirham or slate, right? The same difference of qira can be applied here, i.e., if the verse is for a dua and not qiraat, it may be touched, right? So, some people say, it's just the hands. The hand, you can't use the hands to touch the Quran. This is not only the hands; it's any of one's organs. So, if anything has a complete verse of the Quran written on it, even if it's a dirham or a slate, you can't touch it. Let's say with your arms, you grab it with your arms. You can't do that. Any of your organs, you can't do that. Right? If the same difference of qira can be applied here, that is, if the verse is for dua and not qiraat, it may be touched. Now, let's say it's a slate of Ayatul Kursi, right? And Ayatul Kursi is there for the protection of your home, right? So, can you touch such a page? Can you touch such a dirham slate, etc.? So the answer is, because you are allowed to recite it in the state of haze as a dua, you are also allowed to touch it because it is written there as a means of dua and protection. Right? It is disliked to touch books of hadith and fiqh according to Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. However, the most correct view is that it is not disliked according to Imam Abu Hanifa. So you got girls sitting in the madrasa, they're doing Bukhari, they're doing Tirmidhi, etc. Can they touch these books in that state? So it's disliked according to these two ai but according to the most correct view, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, it's fine, it's not a problem. It is prohibited to touch the plain sides and pages of the Quran as it is attached to the Quran. So now you may say, listen, I'm not going to touch the words of the Quran, just touch the side, the page, and I'm just going to turn it like that. That too is not allowed. Why? Because this is a mushaf and it's all counted as one. It is not permissible to touch the verses on a dirham slate wall or in a book of tafsir, but it is permissible to touch the plain sides on which there are no verses. So when we're talking about the dirham slate, etc., we said one thing. One is the verses are written there as qiraat, right? So you can't touch that dirham, you can't touch that slate, etc., because it's qiraat. But if it's as an intention of dua or for protection, you can touch that dirham, you can touch that slate, but you cannot touch the words itself, right? You can touch around it, no problem, but not the words itself, right? If the Quran is touched with a cloth that is not sewed or attached to it, it is permissible. Fatwa is given on this view. However, it is best not to do so. So sometimes people have these Quran covers, and these Quran covers are removable. Uh, no problem, permissible for you to touch it. However, it's better not to do so. So let's say you have to move it from one table to the next or one shelf to the next, and it has this removable cover. No problem, you can do that, but best not to do so. It is permissible to touch books of dua and zikr, but it's not preferable. So let's say you got your Hizbul Azam, etc. Permissible to touch them in that state, but not preferable. It is not permissible to write verses of the Quran or to write on something which already has verses on it, even if it is not being read, unless the hand is not touching it. So a woman can't take a pen in the state of Haidh and Nifas and write verses of the Quran. Let's say she's writing some verse as a taweez or whatever it is. She can't do that. All right. And she also can't write on another page that has the verses of the Quran unless a hand is not touching it. So it's a very extreme situation where her arm is up and her hand is only on the pen and nothing is touching the page, and then she's writing. All right. Uh, she can't. She can do that provided that she doesn't touch the page. So now, obviously, what we're talking about is she can't write. She's not going to write verses. So let's say there's verses of the Quran on the page already, and she's writing other things on it, right? She can't write on that page if her hand is touching it. But if her hand is not touching it, no problem. The unlawfulness of entering or passing through the masjid except in the case of need, like the fear of an animal, thief, cold, or hunger. In that case, it is better to make tayammum and enter. So she can't enter the masjid unless it's an extreme situation, fear of animal, thief, cold, or hunger. Even in that case, it's better to make tayammum and enter, but not required. It is permissible to enter a place where Eid or Janaza Salah is performed and the graveyard. So it's not required for her to be pure. Let's say she's passing through the Eid Salah area or the Janaza Salah area or passing through a graveyard. Permissible for her. She doesn't need to be clean and pure to do that. The prohibition of performing tawaf. If it is done, it would be valid, but she will be sinful and she will have to compensate by giving a dam or badna. Right. So she goes for Umrah. She has to be in a clean state to perform tawaf. If she is in Haidh or Nifas, she can't perform tawaf, and neither will her Umrah be valid because she hasn't performed the tawaf. But if she does it, right, it will be counted as valid. She'll be sinful for it, and she'll have to compensate by giving a dam or badana. Now, there are extreme situations where a woman is, perhaps she didn't prepare for it and then she ended up in Umrah, and she doesn't have the funds to come back to make a qaza for it. There's no possibility in her mind based on a circumstance that she'll come back here and make the qaza for it. So some ulama have given the ruling that she continues with it. She, on that last day, that last moment, she's still not clean, perform the tawaf of Umrah, do whatever is required, come out of it, and then give a dam to compensate for it. Why? Because it's better to actually fulfill it than for it to remain a qaza on your shoulder for the rest of your life, where you got no guarantee that you're going to come back and make qaza for it. What is the advice then to us mothers taking door of our children? Obviously, not making it known that we are in the state of haze at those times of the month. So you simply tell the child to hold the Quran and turn the pages as they go along. And look, there's going to come a time in your life where you're going to have to explain these things subtly, in a way that is tactful and wise. That Allah Ta'ala has created women and have excused them from performing salah on certain days of the month, etc. And this would include them not being allowed to perhaps recite the Quran, so on and so forth, for them to dedicate more time to perhaps their family and chores, so on and so forth. In different ways, you explain these things to kids for the time being, so that they understand your circumstance. Every parent is different, every child is different, but in this particular circumstance, you just pass on that responsibility to the child to do it. They read in the Quran, they should take the responsibility in turning the pages. Okay. The prohibition of conjugal relations and intimacy below the navel to the knee, even if it is without desire with a woman. However, it is permissible for her to be intimate with him. So, in that state, a man cannot be intimate with her. Uh, this would include being intimate below the navel to the knee, right? Regardless of the desire, there's no condition that there must be desire. So, a man mustn't come close to that area. Obviously, here we're talking about skin to skin. On the flip side of it, it's permissible for her to be intimate with him. Um, okay. Now, a woman's word of being in the state of haze, who is chaste or who is truthful according to her husband's strongest opinion, will determine the prohibitions of haze. Now, obviously, whose word do you take? A woman simply says, "I'm in the state of haze." Do you take her word for it? So yes, you'll take her word for it, and the husband has to excuse himself and step aside. On condition she's a chaste and a truthful woman. But if she is a sinner, a fasiqa, someone that is not truthful, and there's a history and a record of her lying all the time, then it won't be based on her word, it will be based on the strongest opinion of the husband. How will he determine that? He would know, okay, at this point, at this time, at the in the month, she spots this is a place of habit, etc. He'll regard those days to be the days of haze, and not regard what she is saying as true and correct. When does this come into play? This comes into play when, let's say, a husband has issued talaq to his wife, and she has to go through 3 menstrual cycles, and then she says, "Listen, my third menstrual cycle is over," but he knows that she is not being truthful and she has a record of lying. He will follow her place of habit, and he will regard the days of a place of habit to be the right days and not what she's actually saying. And if the days of habit haven't passed as yet, he can actually revoke the divorce before the iddah period terminates. So these are the circumstances where it comes into play. If husband and wife engage in conjugal relations willingly during haze, both of them will be sinful. They must make tawbah and istighfar. If one of them was willing and the other was compelled, then the one who was willing is sinful. So you can't do this in that state. And then sometimes the husband forces the wife and she is not doing it willingly. Who's sinful there? It's the husband, or the one that was forced, the one that was, forcing them to do it. That person will be responsible. If it occurred at the start of a haze, then it is preferable for the husband to give 1 dinar in charity to the recipients of zakat. If it occurred at the middle or end of a haze, then half a dinar. In another report, if the blood is red, then 1 dinar. If it is yellow, then half a dinar. These are some reports. It's a matter of preferability. It's not a matter of compulsion. In other words, a man must stay away from it. And if this happens, then he should give some form of charity to compensate for it. If one denies that it is prohibited to engage in conjugal relations, one will not become a kafir, as it is extrinsically prohibited, haram li ghayrihi. So let's say a husband doesn't believe this. Do we say now he has left the fold of Islam because this is similar to denying a law or a verse of the Quran? We say no, he doesn't become a kafir simply by this, because it's established extrinsically through other external sources of the Sharia. It's not an explicit source like you would have verses of the Quran, etc. And lastly, the compulsion of ghusl or tayammum when the blood ceases. This is specific to now Haidh and nifas. This is the only time you will do it. You won't do it when istihaza ends. It's specific to Haidh and nifas. Let's look at 4 rules that are specific to Haidh only. Right? Some are contemporary examples and some are not. But because it's mentioned in the book, it is being presented to you. Number one, the termination. So what we discussed so far was in regards to Haidh and nifas. This is only specific to Haidh. The termination of the iddah period, which is 3 Haidh cycles. You don't have this in regards to nifas. It has to be 3 Haidh cycles. It can't be, let's say, you add a nifas to it. You won't count the nifas. A woman can't say, okay, I'm going to count this first nifas period as the first cycle. No. When it comes to laws of iddah, it has to be 3 Haidh cycles, not 1 nifas and 2 Haidh cycles. Istibra, cleansing of the womb through Haidh. When does this occur? It occurs in a very specific example where a man purchased a slave girl, obviously in a Islamic state where this is an option. So a man purchased a slave girl who was pregnant, right? She gave birth before she came into his possession. Istibra, cleansing of the womb, will only be considered complete once she experiences a Haidh after the period of nifas. So uh, when this occurs, then it means that a man is permitted to have conjugal relations with the woman. So when is this possible? Immediately after she gives birth, or she has to wait a period? So no, she has to pass the nifas period of let's say in it's 40 days. Then a tuhar has to obviously pass, and then she has to experience 1 Haidh for that woman to be permitted for that man. So this is something that's not so applicable in our times, but this is to show you that this law of Haidh is very specific and it doesn't apply to nifas. Then in regards to Haidh, what determines maturity? The Haidh of a woman will determine the maturity of a girl. Number 4, separating the sunnah prescribed method of issuing talaq by issuing 1 talaq in each tuhar period after a Haidh, and the bid'ah non-prescribed method of issuing talaq by issuing talaq in Haidh or nifas. So let's say a man wants to issue 3 talaqs. Our advice to anyone is not to issue it. When we're talking about sunnah, we're not talking about a person getting reward for it. Sunnah means a method, right? So this is one way of doing it. Should a person feel, you know what, this is the end and there's no way this is going to work out in the near future or later on. If a man is determined to do something like that, the way he'll do it is that he'll issue a talaq in a tuhar. Once she experiences an next Haidh, afterwards another tuhar, he'll issue the talaq there. Then she'll experience another Haidh, and then there's a tuhar, then he'll issue the talaq there. So that's one way of doing it, where a person is fully determined in doing it. So in other words, there has to be a Haidh between each one that he issues. But there's no need to actually do it in this way, and neither does he get reward for it. In fact, if he issues all the 3 talaqs at once, he'll be sinning because it's haram to issue all at once. So simply, in the case of divorce, 1 talaq is sufficient. There's no need for a second and third talaq. Right? In keeping the consecutive fast of kafara, if a Haidh occurs in between them, a woman does not have to restart all over again. So let's say a woman broke a fast intentionally through eating, drinking, or conjugal relations, a fast of Ramadan. Now we know she has to make qaza of that one specific fast, and she has to keep kafara. Obviously, this was done intentionally. All right. So she has to keep 61 fasts in total. One is the fast that she actually broke in that state, and the other is the 60 fast consecutively, 61. Now the question arises, Haidh will occur in between them, right? If Haidh occurs in between them, let's say after day 30, she's keeping 30 fasts consecutively, must she restart all over again after the Haidh? So the answer to that is no. Why? Because she cannot control the Haidh. She cannot control the Haidh, right? So that is why this is now specific to Haidh. On the other hand, if she has a nifas, then because she can calculate and determine, listen, I'm going to give birth after 9 months, so on and so forth, and then she has a nifas, she'll have to restart all over again. But in regards to Haidh, she doesn't have to restart all over again. And then we know the numbers in regards to Haidh are very specific. Haidh is a minimum of 3 days and a maximum is 10 days. Okay, now we've done that section, 12 rules in total, 8 for Haidh and Nifas, and then 4 just for Haidh only. Now we come to the second last section of this class, the rules of Janaba, major impurities, and Hadath Asghar, minor impurities. We look at some differences and rules of them. So, the state of janaba, right, where a person had conjugal relations, or a person saw a wet dream, etc., that now puts them in that state of impurity, the state of janaba. It is similar to nifas, except that the performance of salah is not excused and the keeping of fast is not prohibited. So we know in the state of nifas, a woman can't perform salah, a woman cannot observe the fast. But in the state of janaba, all those laws are still applicable. Yes, a person will have to make ghusl to actually perform the salah, but all the laws of salah, fasting, etc., will still apply. So let's say a person woke up and overslept, and Subh Sadiq passed. Can they now keep the fast of the day of Ramadan? So we say yes. Whereas if it was the flip side, it was nifas, for instance, then we say, listen, because you are in impure state at the start, you can't actually keep the fast. Whereas in janaba, that is not the case. Engaging in conjugal relations even before making wudu is not prohibited, although it is preferable, mustahab, to make a ghusl or wudu before doing so. So, person is in that state, had a wet dream, so on and so forth. Can they engage in conjugal relations? So, wudu is not a requirement, yeah. Ghusl is not a requirement, yeah, but it's still preferable to do so. It is preferable, mustahab, to wash the hands and mouth when intending to eat or drink. When you woke up in that state, mustahab for you to cleanse your mouth and hands. That is because there may be a possibility of impurities, etc. Therefore, you remove it. It is permissible to leave the house to fulfill needs and necessities without making ghusl or wudu. So, in the state of janaba, there's no need for you now. Let's say it's you got water cut off, right, and you need to leave the home. There's no requirement for you to now make wudu or ghusl and then leave. If you have to leave, you have to leave. Go get water and then come back. Okay. Then we look at 3 rules of Hadath Asghar. There are 3 rules of minor impurities, right? What do we mean by this? We mean that, let's say a person passed wind or a person went to the toilet, right? They are now in the state of Hadath Asghar, a state of minor impurities. So the first is the prohibition of all salahs and sajdas. If you got no wudu, you can't perform any salah, you can't perform any sajda, including sajda tilawat, including sajda to shukr. The second is the prohibition of touching anything on which a complete verse of the Quran is written, even if it is with other than the organs of wudu. However, it is permissible for an adult to give the Quran to a child, even though the child may be in the state of Hadath Asghar, a state of minor impurity. So, you cannot touch anything that has a complete verse of the Quran Kareem. La yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun. The Quran Kareem is very clear. No one should touch it, or no one's allowed to touch it except those that are pure. So even in the state of Hadath Asghar, minor impurities, you may still have ghusl. There's nothing that negates or invalidates your ghusl, but it's something that invalidates your wudu, does not allow you to now touch the Quran where it is a complete verse. Question arises in regards to, let's say a person is in the state of wudu. Can they hand over the Quran to the young child? So the child is not baligh as yet. The child is 10 years old. Can the child read Quran without wudu? So the ruling is that it is permissible. Yes, as encouragement and to create a habit, you're going to encourage the child to make wudu. But let's say one day passes or one occasion this has happened, no need for them to actually perform wudu. They're not baligh as yet, and therefore they are not mukallaf and bound by all the laws of Sharia as yet. The prohibition of touching the books of tafsir, even if the hands are washed, in which the words of Quran are more than the commentary. If the commentary is more than the words of Quran, it is permissible to touch the book of tafsir without touching the actual words of the Quran in the book. So we discussed in regards to a woman in Haidh and Nifas, touching books of fiqh and also touching books of tafsir. We said there it's permissible. So here too, it would be permissible when, if the commentary is more than the words of the Quran. Here we're talking about the books of tafsir, right? So if the commentary is more than the words of Quran and Kareem in them, and usually your commentary is way more than the words of the Quran, then it's permissible to touch a tafsir without being in the state of wudu. But again, even if that is the case, you cannot touch the actual words in that book. So you can't place your finger over the Arabic words in that book. There is no prohibition in touching the books of hadith, fiqh, and zikr, books of zikr, books of dua. So just like we discussed in regards to hayz and nifas, you can touch books of hadith, you can touch books of fiqh. Similarly, here you can do that, but it's preferable. And there's some motivation here. Imam Hulwani says, I attained this knowledge, great scholar, through respect. I did not touch paper without being in a state of purity. And we look at Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, how he would remain in a clean state all the time, every time he recorded a hadith or wrote a hadith. And the acceptance that came through it. Imam Sarakhsi had a stomach problem at night in which he would revise his lessons. On one night, he made wudu 17 times. 17 times out of adab, out of ihtiram, out of respect. So, person shouldn't be lazy and say, you know what, not required for me to do this. Do it, because that is the way a person will benefit from the dini knowledge. And thirdly, it is disliked to perform tawaf, right? It is disliked to perform tawaf. If tawaf of umrah or hajj, right, is performed without. So remember, one is general tawaf. You're there in Makkah Mukarramah and you're just doing rounds to earn more reward, etc. It is disliked to do it, but it is still valid. However, on the flip side of it, you've got tawaf of umrah and tawaf of hajj. This is now you've come into Makkah Mukarramah, you're in the state of ihram and you're doing that tawaf. If that tawaf of umrah or that tawaf of hajj, let's say is the tawaf is ziyara, you've come doing the farz of hajj. If you perform those tawafs without wudu, then giving a dam is necessary. Right? If the farewell tawaf, tawaf wida, or nafil tawaf is performed without wudu, then giving the value of sadaqatul fitr for every round of tawaf performed without wudu is necessary. In both cases, if the tawaf is repeated in a clean state, the dam and sadaqatul fitr falls away. So let's look at this. Normal tawafs, without being in the state of ihram, without it being the tawaf of umrah and hajj, disliked but valid, right? The tawaf of umrah and the tawaf of hajj, right? So these are done in the state. The tawaf of umrah is done in the state of ihram, and then you got your hajj, your tawaf is ziyarah, right? You're doing that without wudu. You will have to give a dam, right? And further, just to add to that, if the tawaf is ziyarah is performed, let's say in the state of janaba, husband and wife slept with each other, and now the husband and wife are doing that tawaf is ziyarah, there it's not a dam anymore, it's a badana. Right? What is dam? Dam is slaughtering a sheep or goat within the precincts of the haram, within the boundaries of the haram. And badana is slaughtering and sacrificing a large animal, a cow, buffalo, etc., within the boundaries of the haram. So it just depends. Yeah, we're talking about just wudu, obviously, because it's under the discussion of hadath asghar. So if that was performed, you'll have to give a dam, right? But if you repeated it in a clean state, let's say you repeated the tawaf of umrah in a clean state, or the tawaf of hajj in a clean state, then there's no need for anything, because now the matter is solved. The third one is in regards to tawaf wida, right? This is done as your last tawaf before you leave Makkah Mukarramah after performing hajj, right? Or you just perform the nafil tawaf, right? So on the top we said disliked, right? But if you actually do it in that state, there's still something to compensate for it. How you compensate for it? You compensate by giving the value of sadaqatul fitr for every round performed without wudu. So the sadaqatul fitr usually in Makkah Mukarramah is around 15, 20 riyals. So you'll take 20 and you'll times it by 7 for each of the rounds that you did in that state without wudu. So that will amount to 120 riyals. Put that in rands. It's a good amount of money. So if that has happened, you have to compensate in this way. But if you repeated that in a clean state, then there's nothing to do. Same with the tawaf of Umrah and the tawaf of Hajj. It is permissible to recite Quran and enter the masjid. So instead of Hadath Asghar, no problem. Permissible for you to recite Quran and to also enter the masjid. There is no prohibition in that regard. That brings us to the end of today's lesson. The last lesson tomorrow we'll discuss the issue of ma'zur, which is a very important section. It affects the laws of istihada, or a woman in the state of istihada. And then we'll look at 2 or 3 real life cases, or real case scenarios of different women in Haidh and Nifas, and then we'll go through those calculations together to determine the valid habit of Haidh or Nifas, etc. Jazakumullahu khaira. Subhanallah bihamdi. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.